We'd like to give a special thank you to Ryes and Grind for hosting the Society of Barley Engineers. Thank you.
So I was sitting out there probably making dumb remarks and drinking a lot of beer not too long ago. So it was totally you. So I really appreciate you guys coming to hear this talk about Trappist ales. For those who don't know, I founded a brewery called Rip Current that was open for quite a while, 11 years, and we closed it recently, so I definitely missed that. And I'm a BJCP Master Judge and longtime Barley Engineer and Quaff member. Yep. Yep. One award or two along the way. So big thanks to Chris for, he made 3 beers that we're going to be pouring during the presentation. So thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. Beers are great. I'm anxious to talk about the styles while you get to try them. And the little funny little angle things that are the bullets are a little prods for Chris to pour beer. So he's going to be pouring a single. We're going to talk about a few slides. You're welcome to drink the single if you want to, or all the pours. But we're going to come to a point where we're going to talk about them. I have slides to talk about each one too. So my topic is Trappist or monastic ales. So monastic just meaning monastery created ales. So it's interesting. As far as I know, he's not, but he might be a... Are you a San Elijo monk? Could be. So I'm going to go over the rules for being a Trappist monk, and we'll see if he applies. I don't know. It's very interesting because first, when I was thinking about doing this presentation, I was thinking about what beer should I pour, and even I, BJCP Master, whatever, kind of screwed up. I realized, whoa, okay, they redid the style guidelines in 2021 again, and I've done BJCP classes at Cal State San Marcos and other places. But so with the current style guidelines, category 26 only has 4 subcategories. Belgian single, or the Enkel, which is what Chris is pouring for you, double, triple, and the Belgian dark strong. So what would you might think might be in this category that's not the Golden Strong Ale, which I kind of understand why it's not. And it's historically, Duvel is the one that created that style. And there's a bunch of, if you go to Belgium, there's a bunch of demon beers that are they all have names of demons that surround Belgian Golden Strongs. I love those styles. You can imagine why the monasteries might not want to have those be part of their beer selection. So they're not in there. Saisons, which I'm a big lover of Saisons. I wish Rip Current would have made more Saisons, but it was demand reasons. Probably don't believe that, but Saison DuPont, one of my favorites. So again, not something made by any of the Trappist breweries. That totally makes sense. And then the one I had trouble with was the Belgian Blonde. And in my mind, some of the Trappist monasteries do make Belgian Blondes, but we'll kind of get into that a little bit. And Lef is the classic example of Belgian Blonde. That's what's called another one of those Abbey style. Lef is it's Budweiser. It's not part of any monastery. So what's the difference between an Abbey ale and a monastery Trappist? Well, I mean, this is kind of a weird designation because it's not something you can taste. That's the difference. It's who the producer is. And in this case, I tried to highlight, this is out of the BJCP style guidelines. I quote them as much as I can. Really, the most important part is it's the religious breweries and kind of the uniqueness, and it's about who the producer of the beer was. And there is a lot of common attributes for monastic or Trappist ales and other Abbey style or Belgian style ales. So you're going to notice that. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit. So I think what's really important for Trappist ales, and you probably are aware of this, is this logo right here. If you see that on the product, that means that the Council of Trappists have ordained or blessed this Abbey as being officially Trappist. and there's a lot of rules. The Trappists are, and I'm going to probably pronounce this one wrong, but I always called it Cistercian. It's something like that, but basically it's a very strict order of Catholicism that historically came out of the north of France, and they broke off and they adopted very, very strict rules for the way that the monks would live, and it was more strict than the other monasteries around, so they wanted to treat their order differently. So they came up with, well, I shouldn't say it that way. They actually were at the La Trappe in northern France, and for a long time they operated independently, and there was an emperor in France that you're probably familiar with who kind of kicked out a lot of the monasteries, and so he was trying to take over most of Europe. The La Trappe monastery in northern France, they moved to Russia. They bounced around in Europe trying to find a home where they could not be persecuted against, and they stopped brewing, and we'll kind of see what happens from there. But they were known as La Trappe, so Trappist is actually to honor the La Trappe monastery, which goes way, way back to northern France. But in order to be considered part of this, you have to meet a bunch of different rules, and this is just a subset of the rules. So you have to be a Cistercian monk, a commune. All your beer has to be, or product, because notice it says the word product here. So whatever product it is, but I'm talking about beer, obviously. It has to be produced within the walls of your monastery. It has to be overseen by the monks. Even if they're not actually producing it, they have to oversee the general aspects of it. And then the general reason that you're making it is not to be, like, you're not going to try to buy Budweiser or anything. You're not trying to be a big brewery and make lots of money. You're just trying to generate enough revenue to support the monks in their mission. And if there's any profits that come out besides what's needed to support the monks, it gets donated to charity. There we go. Just a quick personal note, and I think this is kind of what Andy was referring to. So before I met any of you, before I actually moved to San Diego, before BJCP and was an all-grain brewer and everything, I was really, really into Belgian beer. And partially that was because really the beer in the U.S. was not amazing for part of that time, to put it mildly. So I mostly kind of wanted to drink beer in Bavaria and in Belgium. So if you're around in like the years I'm talking about, like the late 90s, 2000s, so I was really, really into Belgian beer, and I went to Belgium more than 35 times. I kind of lost track. It's probably 36 or 37. It's not like a huge number, but still, I mean, how many people do you know have been to Belgium that long? And I really enjoyed my time, and I have tons of stories about Belgium. And if you're ever going to Belgium, some of you know, I can give you like a crazy number of tips. In particular, northern Belgium, lots and lots of tips. And I've been to the tasting rooms at a lot of the Trappist places we're going to talk about. I'm wearing the Koningshoven shirt that's from the monastery. This particular shirt came from one of the Bill Snyder tours a long time ago. He ran some incredible tours. And this is my pre-2013 Trappist glass collection. I have a lot more, but this is all I could fit in this picture. But these are to me, the old Trappist, before they opened it up. Oh, I can hear really well. Can you hear me in the back pretty well? Okay. Before they opened it up to other Trappist monasteries, which we're going to talk about, it used to be Chimay, La Trappe. These two are West Fleteren, which you probably heard of West Fleteren. West Fleteren is really St. Sixtus Monastery. This is Akel, Orval, Westmalle, and Rochefort. And the monks there's a lot of cool things about the old Trappist, but they tend to share a lot. And you're going to see just like a really small thing here that you can see these two glasses look identical, and they really are side by side. Le Trappe, which is in Holland, and it's the shirt I'm wearing, and Rochefort, the exact same glass. This glass is a 1980s West Fluttering glass. It's probably worth a lot. It's identical, except for the printing, of course, to the St. Bernardus glass of the 1980s. And there's a reason for that, because in the 1980s, St. Bernardus brewed West Fluttering beer. And then there's a lot of other stuff which we're going to talk about. There's similarities. So I just wanted to start off with a couple of book recommendations. If you have not been to Belgium, please just send me an email. I'll be happy to send you my tips. I have a lot of tips on them. But the big tips are the Tim Webb book on beers from Belgium, and there's a series, is absolutely fantastic. And in my early days, I've been going there since probably 1998, I think, is when I first started going. It's fantastic. It's a full list of the breweries and all the beers they make, and everything is rated. There's descriptions, but you can form your own opinions. And I showed this version, which is probably really old. That's the book I started with, and mine at my house is all beat up, and I have a million notes written all through it from all the beers I tried. And I'm sure you couldn't read it because I was, drinking lots of beer when I was there. But it's absolutely fantastic. So if you're going, that book is absolutely a must-have. And then if you're not familiar with Stan Hieronymus's book on Brew Like a Monk, it's absolutely fantastic. It goes into the history of brewing. I mean, Stan Hieronymus, this book is a lot like an old Michael Jackson book, if you read those from the past. He goes through the history and why they did stuff, and he documents some recipes, and he talks about different ingredients and things. So both of those are just absolutely fantastic books. I could not recommend them more. So back in the pre-2013 days, with one exception, these are the breweries that existed that were considered Trappist. And it wasn't very easy to be ordained as a Trappist monastery. I stole this from Wikipedia, and it's not a great graphic because some of the dots are in weird places and the names are in weird places, but some fantastic breweries. Le Trappe, which is the shirt I'm wearing, Westmalle, Ockel, which is actually this dot, West Fluttering, which I'm sure you've heard of, like they're this super famous brewery. Rochefort is actually my favorite, along with West Fluttering. Ockel is actually this one way in the north. And then if you get in the south part of Belgium, which is less friendly to English speakers, very heavy French, and then this part is very mountainous down here. You have Chimay, Orval, and Rochefort that are down there. So all really great breweries. So there have been some changes. So things happened since I was a geek about Belgian Trappist beers. After 2013, I don't know what exactly happened, but they decided to open up the reins. Maybe it was something to do with craft beer and beer becoming more popular, but that doesn't really make sense, so I don't really know what. But in 2013, they added this Zundert brewery, which is actually right there, right on the border of Belgium, as another Trappist brewery. But Trappe is a very interesting story, and I know the brewmaster there, and I've done the tour there. And so I might be wrong. I took something off my slide, but in 1999, they lost their ability to call themselves Trappist and use that logo. And it was because the monks decided to let Bavaria Brewery create a subsidiary of them. You might have heard of that brewery before. They're a pretty big brewery in southern Germany. They created a subsidiary that operates the brewery for Le Trappe. And the Le Trappe brewery is beautiful, and it's right on in the monastery. But the monks were kind of handing off a lot of responsibility, and they got a little commercial for 1999, and the people who ordained breweries as Trappists said, you're not following those rules I showed you earlier, so we're stripping you of that. And this part I'm not totally sure on. I could be wrong. I asked Tommy, and I started checking around, but I'm sure that somewhere in my lifetime, I think on the Le Trappe tour, but I can't swear to it, I was told La Trappe is the lost abbey. They were the abbey that got lost out of the Trappist during the period. And then they regained it back in 2005. And what happened was they hired a bunch of like accountants and business people to kind of snoop through what's going on with Bavaria, like how hands-off are you, like all the businessy stuff you shouldn't really care about as a beer drinker. And they decided that, well, in fact, you're probably involved enough that you can start using the Trappist brand again. So they were brought back in. So perhaps they're actually the true Lost Abbey that Lost Abbey is named after, but I know from a fact that Lost Abbey didn't know about any of that naming, and that the Lost Abbey is not named after them, even though perhaps they were referred to as Lost Abbey. I don't know. Another change that happened was in 2021. One of my favorite monasteries, Aachen, lost their ability to use the Trappist logo, and kind of makes sense. They have a lot of rules, and they're very, very. They enforce their rules very tightly. And Aachen, all the monks were gone in 2021. The last one moved to Westmalle to brew at Westmalle. So the Aachen monastery, they actually closed it down and sold it. So it was no longer a monastery at all. So it kind of made sense that they got stripped. But I absolutely still recommend their beer. They still produce beer. The guy who owns it is running it as a commercial concern, but if you see Aachen beer, it's fantastic. So, okay. So I found this graphic, also stole it from Wikipedia. It's really cool because it has all of the one bottle from every monastery. And I would have used my collection. I have a really pretty crazy collection of this stuff, except I don't have the newer stuff after 2013. So a couple came and went. So Aachen, we just talked about them. Chimay, everybody knows Chimay. They're still fine. They're still around. They produce lots of beer. They're probably the most high volume Trappist monastery in the world. Gregorius came and went. They were in Austria. They were open for a while, and then they ended up closing. La Trappe, we've been talking about. That's my shirt. Orval, I'm sure you guys love Orval. So none of the beer styles we're talking about today are beer styles that Orval produces, except for the Belgian single. And that's a style that, has anyone in the room had Orval Vert? Anybody? No. It's not packaged. It's called Vert. It's their Belgian single. And it's actually 4.5%, so we'll talk about that when we get to singles. Spencer was the only U.S. Trappist monastery ever. They were open for a while. Their beers were all right. They closed. They were on the East Coast. Rochefort, that's one of my favorite. Them and West Flutter are my two favorites. And we actually apparently have some Rochefort for later, so I'm excited about that. Trefontaine, which is in Italy, they're still operating. I've only had their beer once. I didn't think it was amazing. Westmalle is really, really good. And they're kind of considered the brewing experts of all the Trappists, and they generally are the yeast providers. And if someone is having a really serious problem, they call Westmalle, and those monks come in to help them out. And the remaining brewing monks from Aachen all went to Westmalle to help out. This bottle, if you're not familiar with why does this thing have no label, that's West Flutteren, and they're considered for many years the top beer in the world, and they're not distributed, and they have no label. Now they have a label, and they're imported in small amounts into the U.S., but their beers are absolutely fantastic, but they're a very small brewery, and they're on the French border. And then Zundert, which is one of the Holland breweries that was added around, well, it says 2014, so right after 2013, during the expansion. Okay, so we're going to have slides like this all through the presentation, and this is my way of kind of talking about John's beer. So if you see something with really nice graphics in this format, oh my God, Chris's beer, I don't know where I got John from. So you should already have it, right? It's already been passed around? Sorry. Yep. So I'm going to be talking about each beer style. So I'm going to kind of gloss over the top part, but occasionally Chris had some comments to mention about the beer at the top part, which call out things that are important about the style. So I'll kind of mention those. But so all of the Belgian Trappist beers, they all have a similar hop profile. So it's kind of mentioned that it's like a spicy floral. Usually it's like a Saaz sort of a hop or a noble hop. A lot of times they try to source it from Belgian hop growers, but the soil and the conditions there is very similar to what you're going to get out of a German hop or perhaps a Czech hop. So that's going to be similar. The yeast they're using is a Belgian style yeast, and it's going to have kind of a fruity and so sort of an estery fruitiness and a phenolic-y sort of character. So a classic Belgian character, you're going to find some like black pepper or a clove, and then on the ester side you might find some like lemon, but not like a lemon zest, like a light lemon fruit character. You might find an apple pear note. You might find like a stone fruit, something like that. So that's going to be common for all these. So this is John's. Why am I keep doing this? Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Let's call it Andy. We'll pick a different name. Try to recover from this. It's not really possible. So it's mostly a Belgian or a German Pilsner malt. My experience from going to Belgium so many times is that a lot of the Belgian brewers actually use Weyermann base malts. Super common. You'll go in, you'll see that in the back. But if they're not, they're using Dingelmann. So it's going to be one of those two. And according to Brew Like a Monk, you're going to see Dingelmanns for a lot of the breweries. The monasteries that I've peeked into, I've seen a mix. So it's usually one of those two. Munich malt, some carapils. I think that's a good way of getting kind of a little sweetness to it. The Munich gives it more of a bready note to it for sure. He mashed it 145 for 30, to dry it out for 35 minutes, then 158. And then the Westmalle 530 yeast, which I'm a big fan of as well. So if you're trying to target this particular style, then 530 makes sense because that is actually the Westmalle yeast. Ferment at 65 for 3 days and then raise for 8 days to 71. I'm sure that's kind of gradual. And then after that, I think you probably want to start checking your final gravity. And if you need to dry it out more, then you just sort of let it free rise and you just keep an eye on your final gravity and let the temperatures get higher and higher. So some of the important parts of this is that the ABV should be low. This one's 5.1%, and I think that's kind of on the high end of so my experience with drinking, so this is a style that when we get into the actual description, they're very hard to find. They generally don't package these. They're more brewed for the monks. So the monks go through long periods of fasting and they need some nutrition. And so this is partially for nutrition and kind of to keep morale up. So they want it to be low ABV, but they want to have, plenty of nutrition in it. So what I've noticed is a lot of the beers tend to be 4 to like 4.8%, which doesn't exactly match the style guidelines. And I've had a few during my visits over there, and so yes. Yes. So there's a brewery in Antwerp that is one of the preferred tap houses for Westmalle. If you ever go to Antwerp, I can tell you how to get to it. They almost, I shouldn't say it that way, they frequently have Westmalle single on tap. I've never seen a bottle of that, and that's, I believe it's 4.5%, although it's hard to know because when you're there, it's not ABV, ABC, but and it's very light tasting, and if you're getting it, it's super fresh because they're driving it right down there. And I've had Vert once from Orval, and I've had a couple others, and usually they're in the 4s, so they're very low ABV. But if you're entering for competition, read the style guidelines, go by what the style guidelines said. And I think they're mostly dead on for the style guidelines, but I think they're usually a little lower ABV than they're saying. So, sorry, Chris, about the John. I don't know where that came from. So, Chris, please start pouring your double. Thank you. Okay, so I have a bunch of slides that basically steal from the style guidelines because I'm just trying to be consistent. So I'm hoping you guys are going to, enter competitions under these beer styles. So I'm just kind of calling out some of the things that they have in the style guidelines. Oh, by the way, did everyone have a chance to try the single? Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very close in a lot of ways, for sure. Yeah, so I think with the single you get kind of a hop flavor and a hop aroma that leads, but it should lead to kind of a pilsnery, crackery sort of base, and then finish very soft like Chris did. Very easy drinking. You should be able to drink a lot of it, but it should be low ABV. I would argue this should probably be more like 4.8, 4.5 in that range, because it is for the monks, and it's hard to find these beers. They're rarely packaged, and when they do, I'm not sure how distributed they are. Okay, so kind of going back to this Trappist single, and of course this is a newer style. When I was learning BJCP, there was no Trappist single category. But again, so the things you want to look for in this beer, it should be light and blonde and clear. It should definitely have a distinctive Belgian yeast character. So you should get like notes of black pepper, which I can get out of this beer for sure. Perhaps some lighter esters, pear, apple, like light citrus notes. But really, you want to have a nice melding of the hops kind of being at the front. And then when you get past that, you get a little bit of yeast character. And then you should get that kind of cracker, doughy Pilsner character right behind it. And I think that's the characteristic for this beer. Yep. Yes, they are. They don't age well at all because the hops fall off. The hops oxidize, and yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's because the real goal of it is for the monks to kind of, because if you remember, this is a religious order. It's more about the monks. It's not about making money or anything. So, but yeah. So out of all the Belgian styles, this style is the most delicate and needs to be drank fresh, which is a reason if you're there to try to seek them out. And it's very hard to find. There's only a few places. Has anyone else had a Belgian single in Belgium besides me? No? Okay. There are a few places you can get them, but generally, for the monasteries, they only have it occasionally at the monastery's tasting room. So again, often not labeled, not really available outside of the monastery. They're very well attenuated. They're dry, like a light hoppy, super refreshing. Just imagine what a monk might have when he's fasting, or she, because it's not just the monks that do it. So the next style that Chris is pouring around right now is the Belgian Double. I'm sure you've had these. These are well distributed. Now we're into it. The only dark beer I'm going to talk about. So with dark beer, you kind of pick up all the dark beer, the dark malt flavors. So again, this is sort of in the reddish, brownish kind of an area. It probably shouldn't be as dark as like a light brown. It should be in the copper sort of reddish area. You start getting into dried fruits. I think a lot of the esters and flavor profiles that you get out of a double really come from the kilning of the malts that go into it. There definitely is a Belgian yeast character as well. So usually the phenols will punch through the dark malts, but sometimes the lighter esters you get out of the yeast you may not actually notice. At least that's been my experience. But things like the pepper, clove can punch through what you get out of the dark malts. Again, so now we've moved away from the single, which kind of had a leading hop flavor, hop aroma, and then leading to a hop flavor, and then it kind of gradually gets to the malt character. That's not true for doubles. Doubles are all about the malt. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting part of it. You can get very creative making a Belgian double, and it's you should do that as homebrewers. You should push the envelope. But a lot of them are actually not that complex. They're fairly simple, and it's pretty common that they have a lot of Belgian or German Pilsner malt, and then they have some caramelized sugars that are in them to get the introduce kind of the darker fruit flavors. You can play around with some other flavors. I think Chris mentions that on his slide about just being careful with things. You can use Saaz hops. I don't love using English hops. I think using more of a noble hop character is great, but you can use English type hops as well. Again, though, with all the Belgian beers, you want them to dry out pretty far. This is the one that finishes the highest. Even though it says 008 to 18, I don't think you want to be at 18. You want to be well below 18. So that's way too sweet. I would say probably 1010 to 1015 is your range, probably erring more towards the 10, 13, 14, 15 is probably a good range for a double. Yep. You can. So for the single, I would definitely do that. For the double, it's fine to put it in the end of the boil because it's like usually a darker syrup. For the triple, and that's more dextrose and sugar, I would add that to the fermenter, and the Belgian Dark Strong, I would add that to the end of the boil. So yeah, it's different. For the darker beers, I think you're okay with the end of the boil. Some people are paranoid about like if it's sanitized somehow. So you can add it like 5 minutes into the boil, the 5 minutes remaining in the boil. Just if you're really worried about it, that'll sanitize it, and it gives the yeast a chance to attack it. The ones when you're adding the sugars mostly for alcohol gain and not so much for flavor, like in the triple, Belgian Golden Strong, which we're not talking about. I think that's better as a fermenter addition after 3 days or something. Yeah, because what happens is you have the yeast, you have the curve of the yeast growth. They start to attack the sugars, and you want them to go after the more complex sugars. And then as they're starting to tire and fade, if you give them an infusion of simple sugars, they're going to go for that, and that reinvigorates them. You'll notice the fermentation will get more frenzy. It'll get going again. They'll wipe out whatever the simpler sugars you're adding in, and then they go back to attacking the more complex sugars when that's all that's left. So yeah, I would say for the triple for sure. Yeah, that's going to dry it out. So for beers like Golden Strong and the triple, that's great to do. Perhaps you don't have to do that for a single. Thank you. Sorry, Chris. Sorry about that. I don't know where I got John from. I have no idea. I wonder if it was from an old slide. So on Chris's slide, and thank you for the graphics. Did you have to pay for these pictures? You found them? Okay. Yeah, these are amazing graphics. They're way better than my recipe slide. So in Chris's double, which everyone has, right? Does everybody have it? Thank you. He gave me a pour earlier. Yeah, I really like this beer. I think this is pretty much nailing the style. So again, Belgian or German Pilsner malt is the primary base. Munich malt, I assume you use Munich 2. Are you using Weyermann? Barca. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's like a medium kilned Munich. Okay. Perfect. So you said 8 to 9 Levabon. Sounds right. Some flaked barley. I don't use flaked barley in my double, but totally appropriate if you're going to get some color out of that. Aromatic. Aromatic's a great Belgian malt for bringing complex, like dark fruits, and you can get some interesting raisin and some other stuff out of that. Same with Special B. I love the 1% chocolate, which is not traditional at all, and I tend to do that too. I think that's a really nice way of like building up the sweetness of the base beer. So again, I don't know if that's traditional, but I think that's great. I'm a big fan of that. He step mashes at 145 again to dry it out, and then after 20 minutes he brings it up to 158. So hopefully, if you're going to do a step mash, you don't want to be at 145 for too long on this beer because it'll overly dry it out. But if you have a good control over your step mash, I think that's a great way to go. He uses the Chimay yeast, which is kind of more clove forward, which is totally appropriate for this style. Then ferment at 64. And again, he's trying to, I think, keep down like the yeast stress enzymes coming out, the bite of the alcohol. So they start fermenting without like creating too much yeast stress. But then as you ramp them up over the 9 days after the first 2 days, you get most of your fermentation done. And notice the final gravity here is 1012. I think that's great. That makes a very drinkable beer. Trappist beers should be very, very drinkable. That's something they always strive to do. So that was really good. And 7%. Okay. Yeah, so I think, you as brewers, you have a lot of knobs. One knob is your mash temp. One knob is what malts you put in. So you can turn different knobs. So if you decided you wanted to mash higher, because you can't do something this sophisticated, like you could do 152 and not step mash it, but have a little bit of dextrose or sugar in it. And just, you're either having enzymes create the simple sugars, or you can put the simple sugars in. It's up to you. So there's just different ways to do it. But you just want to be a little careful because you don't want to be, you don't want to be lower than that. I would say that's probably a good low end. The 08 that's listed, I wouldn't do that. It'll be too thin. I think 1012 is a great number to hit. 1013, 1014, you want to be in that kind of range. So feel free to play with it. You're the brewers. You get to figure out how to get there. And there's different ways to get there. Yeah, Stan?
This is actually a question for Chris. How do you achieve the absolute brilliant clarity on these beers?
We call it the Bell method, after John, or after Chris Bell. John has a small presentation you can give. Basically, it's adding the clarifier into the purged keg, and then you rack your beer onto it. And when you're putting the clarifier into the keg, you don't want to add any oxygen, no atmosphere. So he has this method for how you purge the keg and inject the clarifier, the finding, into the keg, and then you rack into it with no oxygen. When the beer is racking in, it stirs 100% the clarifier into the beer, and then it takes 2-3 days for it to go drop crystal clear. So John uses gelatin. I use xylophine. There's probably a couple of other options that you could do. But with those two, xylophine is a little slower than gelatin. Gelatin usually drops out in maybe 2 days. Mine takes maybe 4 days.
So I use xylophine because he was using xylophine. I've been using gelatin. Xylophine didn't drop out for me as fast and as clear, so I went back to gelatin. I was trying to be more vegan friendly, but then I went back to gelatin.
I should say I've also tried putting. I've also tried putting the fining into the fermenter, into a conical, and do not get the same results. I've tried putting it in and rousing it, and that just stirs up all kinds of mess and makes it not clear anyways. So I really couldn't find a way of clarifying in the fermenter. In the keg, you do get some sludge at the bottom, and you do not want to move the keg after it clarifies, but it comes out crystal clear like that.
So if you're interested, I can do a quick 5-minute presentation on that. So,
Question over here?
Yes. So it sounds like you guys are using floating dip tubes.
No. No,
you're
we
siphoning
are
off
dip
all
tubes to the
sediment
bottom.
and then getting your clarified beer. Huh?
Yeah, so the first couple pints will be kind of clearing out that channel of sludge at the bottom, and then once it starts to run clear, every time you pour the beer, you're like, oh, this is amazing. It came out of a keg that you know is caked with sludge at the bottom, and when you finally open the keg, once it blows, it has a bunch of gunk at the bottom, but it makes beautiful beer when you do that.
Or you could use the Pink Flamingo Brewing Company method, where every keg that's served goes through 2 kegs. A short tube keg, a short tube keg with a clarifier, so that when you transfer to your serving keg, it comes out clear and you leave all that sludge at the bottom. Yeah, and you can transport it without worrying about it. That's right.
Oh, one more question.
Since because we kind of talked about adding sugar, so do you know, Paul, approximately how many breweries are actually adding sugar versus not adding sugar? Like, is it
Commercial breweries in Belgium or in the U.S.? They absolutely add sugar over there. Absolutely.
like every single one of them?
They use beet sugar. They're funny about talking about it, but anytime they're willing to talk about it, they use beet sugar because that's the cheapest sugar source over there. And they do use it. My impression is they tend to use it at the end of boil, as opposed to what I recommend for certain beer styles like Golden Strongs and triples and things, where you add it to the fermenter. Yep, it's a little bit different. And it's very funny talking to Belgian brewers about their techniques. They're not super open about that. So you can hear about that. So when I was a home brewer, I'll just throw out one of the things I did for most of my corny kegs was I bent all the dip tubes, and you can use the keg itself as a bending agent. So I just, it comes in and it usually points all the way to the dimple, right? But I used it gradually bending it with that little dimple in the hole in the keg, and you can bend it so that it comes up about, like a 1/2 inch. And I didn't have to use the double keg option very often, but I knew about it, and I did do that when I needed it. But most of the time, just giving up the final 1/2 gallon and just planning to not drink it, which was sludgy anyways, that made a big difference. And then when I packaged for competition, I would usually try to use a keg that I had, drank several pints out of first before doing that. Now, difference between home brewing and pro brewing is gelatin for most beer styles doesn't work terribly well in our giant fermenters. So we use Biofine. Biofine is great, except there are several huge issues with it. If it's too old, it doesn't work right, or if it comes from a source that's too cold, apparently the temperature reacts to it, and it's not able to stratify larger solids as well. And the other thing is that it is absolutely critical that you mix it throughout, or it doesn't work almost at all. So with pro brewers, the best pro brewers have an inline method where they introduce the Biofine as the beer is transferring to bright, and it's gradual. However, most of us can't do that. Like, that's not common to find that with small breweries. So you have to be creative. You have to come up with a scheme for how do you get it so it gets in and gets mixed. And you could probably talk to 5 brewers and get 5 different answers how they do it. We did a lot of experimenting with it. Some brewers put it into the bright tank first and they transfer on top of it. Some people do a partial transfer. Then they introduce the biofine. Then they transfer the rest of it. That's actually what we settled on. We did a lot of testing. Some brewers go ahead and fill the bright tank up, and they just pour it in at the top. They think it just kind of goes through, and we didn't really notice good results with that. So if you're using biofine at home, I'm a big believer in biofine. I'm not trying to say anything negative about it. I like it better than gelatin, for sure. But you have to figure out how you're going to properly mix it. So the 2-keg method may be your way to do that. So that's something to think about. We're on the Belgian triple. So Chris is going around pouring everybody a triple. Thank you. Another beer I thought was really to style. Apparently I judged this in NHC, and we talked about this a little bit. So the Belgian triple style, there is some variance in the style like there is in all styles. So Belgian triple, you might wonder, okay, there's Belgian Golden Strong and there's Belgian triple. They're really similar. We're going to talk about a little bit how they're different. But again, you want to have the yeast character that's common for the Belgian style yeast come through, which is kind of the spicy floral thing. You want to have the color needs to be a hint darker than a Belgian Golden Strong, so you're getting into yellow and light golden in color. All of them have to be great clarity, which Chris has done in all of his beers we were just talking about. You want to have that big, creamy, long-lasting head. A lot of the Belgian breweries in the early days would use bottle conditioning in order to get that. I don't think that's as common anymore because it's really hard to control consistency doing that for a bunch of reasons. So flavor profile, again, spicy, fruity. You're definitely going to get some alcohol kind of bite, but it shouldn't be fusily like, ooh, you shouldn't feel like paint thinner. Like there's none of that kind of bite. You should actually get a kind of a perfumey alcohol character that tastes sweet, and it rounds out well with the sweet base malts, which are generally Pilsner. You kind of get that Pilsner crackery character. I prefer the peppery phenols, but some of the yeasts are more clove forward. That's totally acceptable. And then on the ester side, you're going to get kind of the orange tangerine kind of characters. Those are my favorite, but you might get lemon or some other fruit flavors as well. Again, it's highly carbonated with very little warming sensation. On the hop side, you have some flexibility. Styrian Goldings and Saaz, I think, are good ones to target. Those are probably the most common, but don't feel constrained to that. You could use any sort of a nobly sort of character hop, as long as it has kind of a nice herbal character. It's more about how much you put in. You don't want to overpower the other flavors of the beer, so you want balance. So this style is like the Belgian Golden Strong, which is, again, like a Duvel type, but it's slightly darker, more full-bodied, and so this is something to remember. It's going to have a little more of a fuller body. It's going to be sweeter, but malty sweeter, never sugary sweeter, and more of an emphasis on phenolics and less on esters. So that's important. So I believe Chris used Chimay on this one, and I think the blend. That's right. Okay, well, you're here. And I think a good reason to use that blend is Chimay is phenol forward, and you're going to get the cloviness, and that's really cool. I don't have experience with blending these two yeasts, so I think we covered that. Oh, so one important thing about this particular Belgian triple is he's targeting triple Carmelite, which is a very famous triple in Belgium. It's a little bit different because the triple is about having 3 different grain sources. So it's using barley, wheat, and oats, and some are, actually all of them, I believe from the tour, they said all 3 when they make it are unmalted. They also have other sources as well in there. So from that, you're going to get more of a mouthfeel throughout than other triples. So that's why it's always interesting to try different triples and kind of compare the mid-palate and the finish. So triple Carmelite tends to have more of a little bit fuller mouthfeel and a little bit more maltiness, and actually just more fullness on the finish. So again, So Chris used 80% for Belgian German Pilsner malt. So the wheat, oats, and then of course the barley are sort of the three sources here. Carapils and Carafoam, it's a good idea to have a little bit of that in there. That's going to give you some residual sweetness. It's going to make it all the way through fermentation, which I think is very nice. He uses a 132, 145, 158 step mash. And if you're thinking, wow, I don't know how to do that, it's a lot. It is pretty tricky to do stuff like that. You can come up with your own recipes that, particularly in a triple, you can use sugar in the fermenter. And if you can't handle the 132, 145, think about like 153, 154 single mash with dextrose going in day 3 or 4. You can do that. Chris?
The only reason I add the 132 is because of all the proteins added by the wheat and oats. So I want to try to break this down, make a clear beer out of it, but also still have the body. So I don't do a 122 protein rest. I do a 132 to still keep a lot of the medium-sized proteins around for that body, but get the clarity.
And that's a great reason to do it for triple carmelite. So if you're not doing triple carmelite, you probably don't want to do that, but I think that totally makes sense for this style. That's great. Fermentation, again, starting on the cool side, and then kind of gradually working up to the 70s to get the fermentation going. That helps out with the yeast stress. He finished at 2013, which is great. You can be lower. Triples can be 10-10, no problem. But that's the difference between triple carmelite, which probably is 10-13. 10-14. Yeah. 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 I thought you researched it. Didn't you find they published it? You measured? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so that's what you want to decide is what's your target. And that's the great thing about being a brewer. Pick your target, try to hit the target. So, absolutely.
Also, the carmelite is lighter, the SRM is lighter than a traditional triple.
Yep. Yeah, you can tell this doesn't have that orangey character, which you'll find in some triples as well. Yep. Very good. No, I think this is excellent. Okay, the last style is Belgian Dark Strong. Oh, yeah, Ryan?
What's your favorite triple? You mentioned Westfall and Westletter, and they don't really do that style. So what would you kind of pick as your favorite?
I really like West Small triple. I'm a big fan of that. My favorite triple in the world is not exactly the style, and it's called Degar. Anybody had Degar triple? Yeah. It's 12%, 13%, but it's absolutely fantastic. But you can only get that at one place. And ironically, the brewery that makes it for them, which was a big secret during a lot of my visits there, but it became public, their triple I don't like at all. So Degar triple is my favorite, but outside of that, I would say I like Westmala for sure. It's a secret, but if you go and look around the brewery or around Degar, they have it all over the walls. So
Paul,
you know where it is, Chris? What? Yeah, Van Steenberg. That's right. But their triple is really not very good. Yeah, it's Van Steenberg. It's right outside of Antwerp. Yeah, you can. I don't really love any of their beers. They're pretty good. I mean, they're not terrible or anything, but whatever they got going with the garb, I mean, that's great. It is absolutely amazing, and you get the little bowl of cheese with
Paul, I went to Degar, and the night we went, we asked for the Degar triple, but they said we can't serve that right now, probably because they didn't have any glassware.
Oh, no.
So they said, but there's a very good close, second, and that would be the triple Carmelite. So we had that. We went back the next night, and we got the Degar triple, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, I have a little story about Degar, and I was going to keep it short, which in 1998 was one of my first trips to Bruges. And I was a super beer geek and really into finding stuff. And I found a beer blog of a guy, it was completely in Flemish. And in 98, it wasn't that easy to translate languages. So I had to like hunt, and I was an internet guy. I worked on the internet in the actually during those years, the early internet. And finally I found a way of translating it, and they mentioned it was really sketchy, the wording that came out of it, but something about a fire alley, like go to the back square, you pass the back square, and something about a fire alley. And I'm like, wow, I have to find this. And I looked at all the maps, and I looked in Tim Webb's book, which is the authority of all that stuff, and it was before that had come out. And I looked online, and nobody had Degar anywhere. It was so early on. And if you're going to try to find Degar now, you're going to have a lot easier time. But what you do is you go to the back square, you walk past the post office. It's on the right side. You go back about a half a block. You're going to go through all this tourist stuff on both sides. And there's a fire alley that's literally the width of my shoulders. When I walk through it, I can hit, if I do this, I hit both sides. And it's an old fire alley. Yeah, you're in big trouble. So you go back, and it's an old rickety staircase, and you can picture me, those who've been here, walking up. There's a spiral staircase upstairs. So you go, and it's all, in the old days, it was all locals. And when you go in, everyone's looking at you like, no, you shouldn't be here. And, I knew I shouldn't be there, and the first time I went, it was full downstairs, and everyone was locals, and this was like probably 98. And I'm looking around like, there's nowhere for me to sit. And there's this old rickety spiral staircase in the back corner. You go in it, and I'm just barely fitting going up this thing. And I got upstairs. I'm like, I wonder if they're even going to serve me. I was the only one upstairs, and I was kind of worried. And finally they came up, and I showed them I had the Tim Webb book, but it actually didn't have Degar in it in those days. And they, after they established I was American, I was a beer guy, they sort of said, how did you find this place? And I said, it was very difficult to kind of explain, trying to translate this guy's beer blog. And he's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. He said, Tim Webb is sitting downstairs. It's funny you have his book. And I'm like, so I wanted to go down and talk to him. But yeah, it's amazing experience. You get their triple, and you get a little bowl of cheese that comes with it, and totally recommend it. So I went there probably 6 times before 2001. I was there like every time I was in Belgium, and it came out and it got more and more crowded. There was more English-speaking people, and suddenly they were chopping up these giant blocks of cheese because there were so many people ordering it. And in the early days, when I said, "Who makes your triple?" they were like, "Oh, we." It's funny when you go over there and you ask a question they don't want to answer. Oh no, we can't talk about that. And I'm looking up on the wall, and they have all these Von Steenbruge beers, and I'm thinking, you have a good relationship with Von Steenbruge, don't you? Yeah, we do. Then Tim Webb finally put it in his book. I think it was the version after the one I showed you at the beginning. So, but yeah, that's a great place to go. And my first trip with Bill Snyder, he let me run the Bruges part of the trip, and I took everyone there, and that was a lot of fun because I said, all right, somewhere on this street, everyone has to find it. There is a really cool beer place, and like people ran past the alley, and they're looking around like, where is that? Yeah, it was very cool. So if you got, I love Bruges. It's one of my favorite cities in Europe, easily, and experiencing Bruges Berthe and going to Degar are amazing. So all right, back to Belgian Dark Strongs. I'm a big fan of this style. I wish Rip Current would have had a chance to make more of these. I made a lot as a home brewer. I've always been a really big fan, and I know it's very cliche to say you like Westy 12. Westflutter 12 is like made this style super famous throughout the world back in the 90s and early 2000s for great reason. And this is one of the beers I never felt like I was able to really clone. So you'll see what I work in progress recipe. If anyone wants to try to do anything with it, I'd be happy to help. So again, we're back to dark beers. So you're going to now we're back to dark malt complexity, dark fruits. You're going to get all the same yeast characters, the phenolics, and some of the yeast esters, although they don't really punch through as much because this is a big dark beer. You're looking for things like raisin plum, dried cherry, fig, prune. These are all things I always look for. You want to have some spicy phenolics, and all this is in the aroma and the flavor. One thing that's really key is that this beer, as a Trappist beer, it's not a quad. It needs to be very dry and drinkable. You should be able to drink a pint, no problem. And I know drinking a pint of a quad is really hard. So that's a really big difference. And if you're doing a Trappist Belgian Dark Strong, they tend to really dry them out. Again, high carbonation. There's this comment in there about sometimes known as a quad, but they're extremely different if you go to Belgium. Quads are way sweeter than the Belgian Dark Strongs for a lot of breweries. There is some variation there for sure. And I don't know if they just didn't want to introduce a quad style in the style guidelines or not. Gordon didn't judge GABF this year, so I didn't get to talk. I was going to ask him about that. They're high ABV. So, but really the way to make this style of beer, might as well get so this is sort of my recipe. I had a beer called West Carlsbad 12, which I know some of you have had. You probably don't remember it. A few of you guys over here had it. But this was my ongoing attempt to clone Westy 12. And I just show the cap because that's the way traditionally you would know you have Westy 12. In the old days, there's no label on it. This neck label is a shared label they do with Westmalle. Westmalle puts a label on it. Old school Westfleteren doesn't have a label, but they're doing labels now in the U.S. Long story there. I have a lot. We can talk about that. But really, the key though, as many times as I've tried. Oh, can we pour the Dark Strong? Can we start passing the Dark Strong around? Somebody in the back have it? Yep. Thank you. So I've kind of cheated. We have Rochefort. Yum. So if we're not having Westy 12 and we're not having something close to Westy 12, which I won't say what that is, let's have Rochefort 10. Oh my God, that beer is amazing. Totally different yeast and the flavors are different. But if you want to clone a beer like Westy 12, it needs to be really drinkable. And the hard part of that is it needs to finish dry on the finish, and carbonated and brisk and bright, yet have tons of flavors in the mid palate. And so I've been trying really hard to do that, and I looked at Brew Like a Monk, and there's a Westy 8 recipe in Brew Like a Monk, if you want to look at that. That's where I started. I didn't really find that super helpful, but you could start there. So this is kind of where I landed with West Carlsbad 12 back in 2011. So I was like 50% Pilsner malt, 20% German pale malt. And yeah, they actually use German pale malt in Westfleteren 8 and 12. So Westfleteren uses all Dinkelmans, but I think you can totally use Weirmann. I tried to bring in a bunch of flavors through aromatic and Carafe for color, and Special B again for dark fruit flavors. But really, one of the most important parts is this dark candy syrup. And they do use that in Belgium. And that's where you truly get most of the flavors that make it all the way through. So that's a very important part of the overall beer. And then they use beet sugar. And I didn't actually use beet sugar in my recipes. So this is a change to my last brewing of it in 2010. I think it's absolutely necessary because I was just not quite getting the finish I wanted. So if one of you guys wants to try to brew this, I recommend like about 5%, some simple sugar, probably after 3 days, just to get the ABV up and a little less malty and make it more brisk and tasty. So I did a step mash of 149 to kind of, again, try to get more simple sugars. If you're going to do this method with a little bit of actual simple sugars put in, I think that 149 is good, and then step it up to 153. Westfleteren uses Westmalle yeast. It's well known. They borrow the yeast from Westmalle Abbey. I recommend start off, very similar to what Chris does. 2 days of like 68, let the yeast get acclimated, get through the growth phase, eliminate some of the yeast stress, and then let it ramp up to 72. And then, if you read the books, they're going to talk about free rising into the 80s and stuff. I don't think that's really necessary. but as needed. So you get 72, 7 days, see what your final gravity is, see what it tastes like. If it's too sweet and you feel like things have kind of died down too much, free rise it. And if you want to go into the upper 70s, yeah, I mean, do that. But I don't think that's required. And I think one thing that's really key is notice this is a Belgian Dark Strong, and the final gravity is 1013. I think that's what West Fletiron does. And it may sound kind of radical because this is a big beer. It's 10.2%, and you're finishing at 1013. That just tells you if you did it right, you don't have to use as much malt, and your OG is lower, but you need to have a big, healthy yeast pitch. You need to have a big oxygen addition. You got to do all your yeast stuff, all your yeast tricks to get it to happen. But this beer is absolutely spectacular. If you ever have a chance to try it, which probably mostly you'll be in Belgium if you're going to try it, I definitely recommend it. Yep.
Of all the Belgians I brew, I find the quad to be one of the most difficult as well. The grain bill, the mash schedule, and how you ferment it is so much more difficult to get that final balanced flavor, as opposed to too sweet or too dry or too much roasted flavor, all the dried fruits. All of that needs to be balanced out, and it's really tough on that particular style.
So I think for people who remember me at Rip Current, as it happened, we were known for like making a lot of big beers that finish drier and more drinkable and not, where's the alcohol kind of thing. I used to get that all the time. It's all about what Chris was just talking about. It's about proper yeast pitching, proper yeast nutrient, plenty of oxygen. Day 2, like in the morning when you wake up that next day, adding oxygen again. And like, I know you're worried, oh my God, I'm going to oxidize a beer. Not in a beer like this. Big beers, once you get over 8%, and particularly big dark beers that have a lot of less fermentable dark sugars and stuff, that second hit of oxygen is really important. You can add another dose of yeast nutrients. It's kind of like making a mead in some ways. That's a good thing to do. So I definitely recommend that, and I totally agree with you. I didn't make quads. I don't enjoy quads because they're too sweet for me, but Belgian Dark Strong is just like almost the same thing. So I'm totally with you on that. Yep.
So for the dark candy syrup, because I looked it up because I couldn't remember which is which.
Yep.
But they have extra dark and then everything
Yeah.
else is pretty much on the color line. So which one do you recommend?
I can only talk from my homebrewing days on this. There was only D. It was called D back in those days, but they came out with a D2, which was extra dark, and I think the extra dark would totally work. So I didn't have that when I was a homebrewer. They only had D. But nowadays, you guys have 3 or 4 candy syrups. You guys have way more options than I had. We didn't have those. Yeah. So I would go as dark as possible as long as there's no roast character to it at all. You should not have any roast character in any Belgian style beer. Yep. Even Belgian stouts. Oh, sorry, I glossed over that comment. Yeah, Chris had a tip in one of his recipes, I think it was the double, about being really careful with Special B. Absolutely agree. You want to avoid any roast character, so be really careful with your super dark malts. They should be really low percentage. And Special B is a weird one because you get a lot of things like raisin and like dark fruit, dried fruits and stuff. Yeah, that's not one you want to overdo it. So that's not a malt to use to darken your beer for sure. Use Craft 2 dehusk and just a tiny bit of that. Yep, absolutely agree. 2 or 3%. Yep. Any other questions on Trappist stuff? No, not hearing any. You guys take it easy. Thank you.